Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and today we present the next in our series of episodes focusing on human-centered security. Last week, we took a deep dive into how human vulnerabilities are exploited. But today, we're looking forward, how to manage those human vulnerabilities. ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin is in the studio for that conversation. Steve, in this series on human-centered security, we've learned that it's mostly human vulnerabilities, whether triggered through work pressure or by a malicious attacker, that lead to errors that significantly impact an organization's reputation or even put lives at risk. Organizations can strengthen information security programs in order to mitigate the risk of human vulnerabilities by adopting a more human-centered approach to security awareness, by designing security controls and technology to account for human behavior, and by enhancing the work environment in order to reduce the impact of pressure or stress on the workforce. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Tavia. So, organizations should consider emerging security solutions when they look to address human vulnerabilities. Some steps that you can take towards moving towards that position, I think there are some. And the first, enterprises should really take a look and review and potentially anyway, improve the culture and perception of information security. So carrying out a review of the organization's culture, starting from the most senior positions, considering the organization's mission statement and values regarding information security. These are all perfectly valid and I think perfectly appropriate things to be doing if we want to improve the perception, potentially, of information security across the organization. All too often, information security is viewed as being in a silo. Well, if you put an entity into a silo, you're really saying, they're not part of the overall organization. And so when they then try to issue perhaps a policy or a process or a guideline, it's viewed as something that's being done to the rest of the organization as opposed to something that is embedded across the enterprise. And so by understanding some of those things, you can enable perhaps a better perspective of how the organization chooses to value information security and then identify areas that have significant vulnerabilities, whether they be human or otherwise, that require further training and development. So that's the first thing. I think secondly, it's all about pre-qualifying knowledge and tailoring employee awareness. No two individuals are going to be the same. So we have to gain a perspective of current employee awareness and understanding of information security behaviors, of threats, and values by testing knowledge of cognitive biases. Now, results may be unique to one area of the business or even to individual teams or departments. Individuals will also exhibit different cognitive biases, so during different scenarios. And again, this is valuable information that can indicate where training and awareness campaigns may need to be tailored to specific audiences and activities. They can then next identify threats and run exercises. So I'm a big fan of this simulation, running the exercises. So identify key risks and threats to the business or an industry area. Conduct targeted scenario planning and training, tabletops, phishing campaigns. But they need to be tailored to improve responses to specific threats and enable employees to better react to stressful situations that may trigger cognitive biases. And I think finally, the fourth thing that we should be doing is really trying to promote critical thinking. It's about delivering materials that promote critical thinking and awareness of cognitive biases. And this type of training should develop analytical communication and problem-solving skills, and that reinforces creativity and open-mindedness and does reduce the risk of errors being made. So those are just, 4 different ways that we should probably be taking a new look at the way in which we go about rolling out some of our security awareness.
Well, this is all great, but if we're going to move beyond simply promoting awareness into actually embedding those behaviors throughout the enterprise, we need to get a bit more guidance. So I want to know, how can an enterprise turn the tide? How can they lead the embedding of secure behaviors into their organizations top to bottom? And you also mentioned start at the top and move to the bottom. It seems like a top-down process. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that board members, the CEO, the president of a company must set the tone for security, the importance of it across the enterprise in a language that is understood that is in line with the way in which the business wants to develop. And then there need to be role models. I think that role modeling piece is fundamental. Organizations have historically relied on the effectiveness of technical security controls instead of trying to understand why people are susceptible to making mistakes and indeed manipulation. So a new approach is clearly needed, and one that helps organizations to understand and manage psychological vulnerabilities and adopts technology and controls designed with human behavior in mind, for my money anyway, is the way that we now need to go. And we've called that human-centered security. There are 4 requirements for future success of human-centered security, in my opinion. And we've identified these in our research paper to really help organizations truly embed best practices in the information security space. And it's about developing a risk-driven program. It's about targeting behavior change. It's about setting realistic expectations. And finally, and I think most importantly, it's about engaging people on a personal level.
Let's break each one of those down a little bit more, Steve. How can leaders develop a risk-driven program?
Well, first of all, Tavia, you've got to let risk drive solutions. So ensure each solution has a direct link to business requirements and addresses one or more risks. So form a strong baseline is what I'm saying, and measurement criteria based on risk as a starting point. Then move on to continue to look for alternatives. So challenge complex systems or cumbersome processes rather than forcing behavior change to accommodate them. And really try to ensure that new systems and new processes are as simple and user-friendly as possible. Test them. If you were bringing a new product to market, for instance, you would test it before you actually launched it. And this is something that we should be doing from a security standpoint too. Test the effectiveness before you actually roll it out.
And if you were product testing and the product was not user-friendly, you wouldn't expect the user to change. You would change the product.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So a CISO is ready to target behavior change within the organization after they've developed this risk-driven program. How do they target behavior change?
Yeah, you've got to embed positive behaviors and then empower your people. So promote and value behaviors that facilitate people playing an essential role in strengthening organizational resilience. It's about enabling people to recognize key moments and make the right decisions in the moment. It's about winning hearts and minds through trust, through motivation, and through empowerment. It's about positioning people to make information security a critical element of how things are done around here. So it really is about taking it. I talked earlier about silos, for instance, and having information security in a silo. It's about really moving it out of the silo mentality and embedding it into the way that things are done.
You didn't say embed positive behaviors and then reward your people, which we learned from a prior episode that can have a detrimental effect. Those rewards are not what you're getting at here. You're saying promote and value those behaviors, not reward those behaviors. A very different perspective.
Yeah, it is very different. I think for me, the notion of reward for this kind of thing is you've done something exceptional. Well done. Here's a reward. What we're saying here is security needs to be part of business as usual. And so certainly at the end of a year or something, you may want to make a big noise about it, but that means that you aren't then rewarding necessarily in the moment because it's embedded in the way that you do business.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you've cautioned that organizations need to next set realistic expectations. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's important, I think, that leaders set a realistic timescale. So they should plan in detail, but think in terms of 3 to 5 years for lasting change. Now, for a lot of people listening to this, they've probably just sort of sat up and said, really? 3 to 5 years? I mean, that's a lifetime.
They want 3 to 5 months.
They want 3 to 5 months. 3 to 5 minutes would be ideal.
Right, even better.
But the reality is, there isn't a silver bullet. So we've got to stop looking for it. And behaviors across an organization don't change overnight. We're talking about putting in place some fairly significant transformation programs to get your organization from where it is to where it needs to be. And it's this consistency over a period of time that is so fundamental. So I think it is about, alignment with the strategy, with business strategy, embedding, as we talked about slightly earlier, and just making sure that you're continually reinforcing some of these messages. And of course, measuring your effectiveness over that time frame.
Right. You've reinforced how powerful it is and how imperative it is to engage people on a personal level. So can you talk us through the ways organizations can more meaningfully engage with their greatest security weakness and their greatest security opportunity, their people?
Yeah, I think a few things. I always talk about, aiming for stop and think. It's about preparing people to make the right decisions, build some time into it, know when to consult. So if everyone stops and thinks at key moments, then we're part way there. And don't attempt to train people for all occasions. You're never going to be able to capture all of those. What you can hope to do, though, is just make it okay for people to just take time, just to think things through, to perhaps question. And for some organizations, that's going to be very difficult in today's business environment where it's all about speed.
Right.
But stop and think for me is a key one. Secondly, I think it's about moving from tell to sell.
What do you mean by that?
Whenever I talk to CISOs and security people, I always say to them that they need to be two things that they probably dislike the most. They need to be consultants, providing consultative advice to the business, and they also need to be salesmen. They need to be selling the different concepts of good security. So moving from telling to selling is about designing persuasive solutions which are really tailored to the risk profile of the different audiences.
So you're saying capture people on an emotional level?
I am, yeah. And I think it's about selling them on the benefit of doing something as opposed to instructing. We can all produce policies. We can all have a traffic cop approach to policing those policies. That's telling. Explaining to somebody why the policy is necessary and the implications of it.
And why they're integral to the success of it.
Absolutely right. That is selling, because you're then getting their buy-in. So moving from tell to sell, I think, is absolutely key. Tapping into the right skills. So, a lot of security people don't have the right skill sets to do some of the things we've just been talking about. So it is about identifying and deploying expert skills to define and implement solutions which are distinctive and really ensure that the program hits home, perhaps through a strong brand identity, the way in which it's implemented. So typically the people who have got good skill sets in this space are your HR team, your marketing team, for instance. So tap into those skills, get them involved. Now, this isn't a security problem.
Right.
I think that's the important piece here. This is an enterprise-wide issue that we're trying to address. If we talk about transformation, if we talk about change, then everybody has to be behind that. And so the number of different departments you can actually engage with across the enterprise in being involved in providing a solution, the better.
Yeah. So you have aim for stop and think.
Yep.
Move from tell to sell.
Yep.
Tap into the right skill set. Are there any other things that good leaders should be thinking through?
There are two others that I'd highlight, Tavia. The first one is a favorite of mine as well. I like to be able to identify champions. You can't be everywhere all the time across the organization. So identifying a network of information security champions from the business to help perhaps introduce and sustain positive information security behaviors is really important. And you have to ensure, of course, that these champions are trained and are prepared to undertake that role with confidence. But there are benefits, because if you can get the two-way flow of information working, then from a security standpoint, you're getting frontline information about how security needs to be integrated better with the business and some of those real-life instances that the champions can provide you with. So that's informing your security program. And so that, for me, is pretty key. Having, some champions that are out there in the business that can provide that support for you. And then finally, it's about holding people accountable. It is about addressing unacceptable behavior constructively. Unacceptable means a variety of different things. It could mean anything from somebody clicking on a phishing email. They're not stupid. They've not maliciously done it. It's a mistake. So how do we then step in the moment and address that mistake? And I think that is hugely important, because you want to create an environment where people are not afraid to put their hand up and say, I made a mistake, or I need some help here. I don't know whether I should be doing this. And so it is about accountability, but it's also about very clearly signposting where people can go to get the support that they actually need in the moment. And I think all too often organizations miss that final piece because they've rolled out the awareness program. It's the sort of you should know, you attended, it may have been a bad day. You just may not have been up to it when you were on that particular course. And so, or you may be under a huge amount of pressure and stress, as in the scenario that we talked about with Alice and Bob, So just reinforcing where people can go and having, as I say, champions that they can refer to if they're not in a security role or if they're perhaps in frontline business, I think helps there as well.
This is great. I think what you've revealed is that the design of technologies and controls and policies and procedures, it has to be suitable for human interaction. Those things should guide users to good security behaviors instead of potentially triggering their thinking errors that undermine the enterprise. Reviewing the current security culture and perception of information security within your organization should give leaders strong indications of which thinking errors are impacting the organization. And increasing awareness of the human vulnerabilities and the techniques attackers use to exploit them, then tailoring more human-centered security awareness training to account for those different user groups should be fundamental elements of enhancing any information security program. We've been talking about insider threats, and the reality is that insider threats have intensified as the workforce has become increasingly mobile and hyper-connected. Almost every worker, you and I included, have multiple devices that can compromise information instantly and at scale, so the impact isn't limited any longer by the amount of paper that someone can carry. And simultaneously, social norms are shifting, and this is eroding loyalty between employees and employers. We don't have jobs for life anymore. We have a portfolio of careers. Numerous factors are increasing enterprises' exposure to the threat posed by insiders, and technical controls, as we have seen, are limited. So to combat the threat, organizations must invest in a deeper understanding of trust and work to improve the trustworthiness of insiders. And I know, Steve, that is going to be a bigger focus for the ISF in 2020, so we'll be back with more conversations and interviews around that most important topic, trust, as well as others throughout the year. Over this series of episodes, we've looked at human-centered security, first identifying human vulnerabilities and reviewing cognitive biases or thinking errors relevant to information security. Last episode, we reviewed forms of social power and attack techniques, or how those human vulnerabilities are exploited. And today, we discussed how to develop a human-centered security culture in order to manage human vulnerabilities. I look forward to continuing the conversation, and Steve, thanks for walking us through such great information and scenarios. And I do hope that you enjoy the funds that I transferred to you by text and vishing and smishing. We'll be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, listeners, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review it, and we'd love it if you'd share it in your own networks. Be sure to visit securityforum.org to join the conversation on our LinkedIn group, to access the show notes, and to download ISF's research, practical tools, and guidance relating to this discussion. We'll be back soon. Thanks for listening.